Australian media owners are grappling with a troubling trend as agencies increasingly secure contracts by promising unsustainable low media rates, undermining both the viability of premium journalism and the effectiveness of advertising. For more, we're joined by Darren Woolley from Trinity P3. Good to see you. A race to the bottom?
A continued race to the bottom, Ahron. As we came up to the end of the financial year, we were reviewing the past 6 months, and there's been some really high-profile media agency tenders which have left the market grumbling about. Most of it was felt to be decided around how cheap the agencies could deliver the media to the clients, and that would be the only way that they could win it. This is indicative of the really quite challenging financial times that both marketers are finding themselves in, but it's being passed on to the agencies and to the media owners with lower rates.
Who then benefits from slash rates?
Well, really no one, to be honest. It's a short-term win for a marketer to get an agency to commit to lower rates, but in some cases what we're hearing is further grumbles from the media owners and their sales teams saying that often these lower rates are promised by agencies without any reference to them, and they're not sure how they can even possibly deliver it, with traditional media, as we've talked about previously, really struggling in the current market.
So is journalism put at risk here? Because obviously a lot of journalism relies still on the traditional ad market.
Absolutely. One of the things that the advertising pays for is a robust news journalism. And what we're seeing here is that this increasing pressure is actually cutting the budget of the finances and the profit of these organisations. And media owners are not exactly in a very positive position, particularly traditional media owners. As we've talked about previously, the big platforms, the Metas, the Googles, the Amazons are doing quite well, but it's actually the traditional media where news journalism is actually created and offered that is taking the brunt of this pressure.
And it feels like every few weeks another major Australian media company, and just like around the world, is having to make cuts too. It's very hard to find that sustainable business model for journalism, isn't it? I mean, even the BBC, which doesn't rely on taxpayers but licence fees, is having to make massive cuts here as well. We're looking at a reshaping of the industry.
Oh, absolutely. The model of advertising paying for this is clearly under threat. And, so the news bargaining incentive, this version was called by the Australian government, has been postponed. We saw that happen only a few weeks ago. And yet there has to be a new sustainable model to pay for news journalism. The thing is that the marketers may not realise what they're putting at risk. By demanding lower and lower media rates, what they'll end up with is inventory that may not actually be delivering an audience. There is ways now to create advertising inventory, especially in the digital age, that may not be delivering the audience you think you're getting. So you're paying less and getting less.
But what is happening now, and I think it began during COVID, correct me if I'm wrong, but as people got used to streaming, got used to YouTube, many of the agencies that were looking for that premium for traditional free-to-air broadcasters, for example, started to demand from those broadcasters similar rates to what they were getting from advertising on YouTube. Is that correct?
Yeah, but what they're giving up is the idea of actually being able to make a very public stand. One of the things that we know about broadcast media particularly is that it's something that is consumed by society, and everyone is seeing it. The promise that these platforms have made is that you can target almost to an individual level, but that means that the individual, if they actually see it, is only consuming it alone. It's not a shared knowledge or a shared version of what's actually occurring in the world. And I think the loss of media shared, news media shared on that basis, will have an impact and is having an impact on society.
And what's interesting, if we have a look at the Australian mass media market, we look at, say, Seven, we look at Nine Entertainment Company, these are companies that have continued to buy and find synergies, and that's been, the buzzwords over the past decade or so. But now they're starting to realise that by having everything together, it hasn't exactly saved the company or even the value of the company in the case of Nine Entertainment Company as well. So if you are a Nine and you're looking at what's happening here at the moment, what could you be doing?
Well, look, I think what they need to do and what Nine is doing is trying to compete, with streaming services like Stan, boosting their digital content. We're seeing sports rights coming up again, and trying to get that balance of meeting the government's expectations of the anti-siphoning rules to be able to provide a component of it free. But they have to make money, and they have to be profitable to exist. So they need to find new ways of competing with those streamers, the streaming services, and the platforms, to be able to get a more than fair share of the advertising budget and the overall media revenue.
My final question on this topic, because you just raised an interesting point, is sport. Obviously the massive NRL deal, the massive AFL deal, all sport. Is that where advertisers are still likely to pay a premium and not be driving things down? And given the past 5 years has been a real push to get away from drama, children's television, and into news and sport, but what you're saying is news is suffering, is sport?
No, well, that's the thing, is that sports bodies are just seeing their fees increase all the time. The rights fees are just going up, and we're getting billions.
And that puts more and more pressure on news departments, because if you have to find $750 million a year to pay the NRL, you're probably running out of places to take it from.
And relying on advertising alone to pay for those rights is no longer sustainable. What we're seeing now is that they're having to put it behind paywalls, but still meet the government's regulations or expectations around anti-siphoning.
Yeah, all right. Now, a new report reveals that fossil fuel companies are spending millions on educational programs in schools, sparking concerns over whether the strategy undermines their social licence as they face growing scrutiny similar to that of the tobacco industry. Interesting topic here. I can very much see both sides. I think that schools have become places where a lot of teachers are talking about the future just being one thing. But as we're seeing, fossil fuels are still a big part of our society. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Look, I think the problem here is the way that it was done. There was absolutely nothing wrong with educating young children. The Jesuits have been doing it for over half a millennium. So, it's certainly a tried and true. Being found out or doing it in a way that is, let's say, looks suspicious is really what's going on here. And the other thing is that it makes you question, are they trying to accelerate their loss of social license? I mean, I can imagine parents feeling quite betrayed if they're thinking that their child's education is being funded for a commercial reason. It would be really interesting to see why were they doing it. The commercial answer is they're trying to soften the backlash that the climate crisis is causing. But they should have perhaps done it in a much more open and transparent way, and also got the buy-in from the parents. They clearly got the buy-in from the schools.
So what are they actually doing here? Just help us to understand, what are the fossil fuel companies actually doing?
So they're actually putting together educational programs as a package so that teachers don't have to do that hard work, and they're paying for all of the resources to go in and sponsoring these lessons in school. Now, what they're doing is reframing the whole climate crisis to look like that it's actually caused by a whole range of things that are not necessarily just about burning fossil fuels. What they're trying to do is extend the life. There is already commercial reasons because of the slow adoption of sustainable energy. There's a lot of reasons why we will rely on fossil fuels for a number of years, but they can see the end in sight. And what they're trying to do is to try and influence public opinion through children. And I think that's where they're going to alienate a lot of parents. They will rapidly become, with this strategy, the new tobacco. Tobacco-sponsored sports to try and make it seem healthy. I think the fossil fuel companies have made a mistake here.
All right, Darren Woolley from Trinity P3, always love your insights on Ticker. Thank you.
Thanks, Ahron.